Yeah, there's no singing intro for this one. Hey everybody, my name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. So here we find ourselves in the first New Movie Diary of a new movie year, or as many of us know this month because of the funny folks at Red Letter Media, it's January. We got nothing much new, folks. Nobody is trying to get in the way of the major December and holiday releases still clinging around, including Nosferatu doing some pretty impressive numbers for an R-rated prestige horror movie. Yeah, aside from all that stuff, it's a kinda take what you can get and like it environment this time of year generally. Except not really, because, okay, we got one new horror movie, pretty standard squeaker candidate flick for the first week of January, The Damned, set in a 19th century fishing village. Pretty typical boilerplate psychological horror stuff. Real Slogville, roaringly cheap twist ending, do not even bother with it. Whereas the real story, I think, for the breakout of this year in movies is actually the exact sort of thing that kind of blows apart the whole you, it's January tradition. Or maybe, rather, it shows us a different side of you, it's January, because the big story in the first week of US film releases in the year of our Lord 2025, as far as I'm concerned, is From Ground Zero. From Ground Zero is an internationally co-produced and supported anthology film, a collection of 22 film shorts, all produced by filmmakers and artists currently living as refugees in the Gaza Strip, the active war zone, and in fact, the ground zero of an ongoing campaign of genocide being waged by the US-backed and materially supported military of the State of Israel against the people of Palestine. Yes, you heard that right. This is a film produced by the work of filmmakers who made these short subjects as refugees in the midst of an active war zone. And I don't emphasize that to drum up or sensationalize it, just to stress the baseline impressiveness of this film as a production, the fact that it even exists. In no small part due to its producer Rashid Masharawi, himself a leading figure in Palestinian filmmaking. He established the non-profit fund that made it possible for these artists to have the opportunity to present to the world a first-hand impression of not just what is happening in Gaza in terms of literal facts, all of which become increasingly horrific with every passing day of this retaliatory, blood-soaked, Bronze Age siege that Israel, again, as a benefactor of the United States' government. But yeah, not just in terms of literal facts, but this opportunity for all of these artists to give a first-hand impression of the emotional and psychological lives of people, not just numbers on a ledger, not just expendable statistics, but as human beings who are not merely receiving this genocide, but still surviving in the midst of it, living within the midst of it all. In fact, let me just give an impression of it by quoting Masharawi himself. This is coming from a Variety article from July of last year at the Taormina Film Festival in Sicily. From Ground Zero has been doing the international festival circuit for at least that long. It's still technically doing so as we're moving into this quite surprising limited theatrical release in major multiplexes. I managed to catch it at a relatively nearby AMC at least. So here's what Masharawi in this article describing producing the film with co-producer Laura Nikolov of the French production company Coorigine. They co-produced the film with Masharawi's film fund. Masharawi, quote, "It was one of our main problems to get out the material from Gaza and also to have contact all the time with the filmmakers. Even if we talk through internet, through social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, all these things, but once you have no electricity to charge your mobile, you have nothing." Masharawi continues, "Sometimes we were working and awake for 24 hours a day because in this area there is electricity, there is internet that we can bring our best there to upload material to France. Our last film came in just 2 weeks ago." So that's the producer of this film talking in the first week of July of last year, describing how basically it seems like what they did was have these filmmakers shooting on the ground and seemingly uploading sending their already edited materials to some sort of cloud, and them literally doing this down to the wire just 2 weeks before this international premiere of the film. And it's perhaps not surprising that so much of what is showcased in these 22 short films that have been assembled in From Ground Zero inevitably speak to merely the act of creating a film in such conditions. From the very beginning with Rima Mahmoud's Selfie, the short that opens this anthology, it takes the form of a writer and filmmaker writing a letter and literally ends with her putting the letter along with a USB drive of her film into a plastic bottle and throwing it out into the sea. Then there's Ahmad Hassana's Sorry Cinema, being another kind of letter film where Hassana uses clips from the productions of his previous low-budget films before the war and incorporates them into this apology on his behalf to the art form he loves and reveres so much, because the day-to-day struggle for survival has forced him to put this thing that gave his life so much meaning aside, though, of course, the short itself, merely by existing, ends up speaking to that irony of being in that position. Of being an artist who, even in these extraordinary circumstances, looks upon his own complete work, his own act of creating in spite of everything, as a compromise, as something that can never live up to his real vision for his art, which is itself inextricable from a vision of a free Palestine. And that's all before we witness Etemad Wesha's Taxi Wanisa, which takes the form of this incredible, almost Bressonian, transcendental, docu-fictional portrayal of a donkey cab driver ferrying various people throughout the tent camps and disaster areas and so-called safe zones of Gaza, only for it to end suddenly with Wesha herself addressing the camera and saying basically, I couldn't finish this film the way I wanted to because of my heartache over the losses I've experienced to my family because of this war, as I was making this film that was supposed to end with the protagonist, the donkey cab driver, dying in an Israeli bombing. Obviously, under the conditions that these shorts are produced, you are not getting works made with the most polished cinematography, the most professional equipment. In some cases, it's clear that many of the filmmakers have rarely, if ever, made a film and have been reached out to and canvassed by Masharawi expressly for this project. Some of these films don't even have much of a sound mix or edit aside from literally just the live ambient noise of day-to-day life and death just out of frame in Gaza, which can range in everything from the authentic laughter of refugee children simply doing what children always strive to do even in the worst of conditions, though, of course, these films themselves were produced over a year ago, giving an added sense of the gravity of these messages in a bottle, where you are constantly reckoning with the fact that you don't know how many of these faces you're seeing, whether intentionally cast individuals or simply the living extras of Gaza. How many of those children are still laughing and playing a year later? Which, of course, lends to the other extreme in ambient live sound, which includes not only the thunder of bombs dropping, but the lurid, distant pop, pop, pop of direct engagement by gunfire, with we as viewers really having very little in the way of confidence about, okay, was this live sound that was edited into, say, this short about a man trying to find and recover his brother and sister-in-law buried beneath the rubble? Or is that actual live gunfire and bombing that we're hearing as these filmmakers are literally risking their lives to produce this short film in an active war zone? This is just one of those cases where the rough nature of the text, the very direct material effects that these filmmakers' limitations have on their works, becomes a part of that art, as does the objective of continuing to cultivate and create art. Perhaps one of the most powerful shorts in the film belongs to Kamis Masharawi's Soft Skin, which not only involves stop-motion paper animation, but dramatizes Masharawi leading a workshop in a refugee refugee camp, teaching Palestinian children to create stop-motion paper animations to tell a story from their own experiences. But even in these limited circumstances, you get a striking polarity between styles and methodologies and even basic ways of looking upon the Palestinian experience from the inside. Some shorts will be rather rough and candid in their portrayal of life during genocide, while others, like Ahmed Al-Dam's School Day, will feature really quite impressive uses of stylized set dressings and colorful lighting compositions and fluid, more dynamic camera movements that show not only an investment in telling a pertinent and meaningful story, but doing so in a way that plays almost disturbingly upon our pleasure in looking, reminding us that even in these circumstances, the incentive to create aesthetical beauty is still so powerful. And I mean, not only for the cynical reason that even in this context, there are still filmmakers among these Palestinian artists who seem to still be quite conscious that I need to make a beautiful image in order to appeal emotionally to an international audience that is fundamentally treating this as an experience and a commodity and not like an emergency message to the world through art. But then there's also the aspect of it where the capacity of even relatively inexperienced filmmakers to marshal their thin resources to present the most beautiful image they can create is still so strong and forceful. But the thematic polarity is just as extreme. One will watch Hannah Awad's No, in which Awad plays herself opening the short on the phone with her colleague and producer saying no, no, no to every offer of a story that involves death or extraordinary tragedy, and instead settles on this real-life band, Soul, that was based in Gaza before fleeing sometime after the making of this film to Qatar. And throughout, Awad's injunction is that she will always say no to any message that does not emphasize peace and positivity and optimism and beauty, rather than violence or fatalism or hatred. And yet then there will be another film that, I'm sorry, I'm hard-pressed to remember the name of it and who made it, but it features a young artist who is literally walking around the rubble of her former university, showing the former art studios and what remains or does not remain of her work made there, and even more so explores what remains of those works spiritually now that she has experienced all that she has. This isn't necessarily completely antithetical to Awad's No, but it does contain the absolutely explosive line from this young woman, which is something to the effect of, "There can be no more peace, even our peace is a murderous peace." I hope I've done a good enough job of impressing what an amazing experience from Ground Zero is, even acknowledging how vulgar and profane even saying that sounds, because obviously the point of this movie is not to just be a good experience. This is agitprop. The point is not for us to simply indulge in the joy of looking, but to see these human beings, to reckon with the direct complicity of our government in their awful suffering and the indignity that we are inflicting upon them, and to use it as at least moral ammunition to at least try to stop it. But maybe that's what brings me back to the fact that this is really the most ironic, the most deeply perversely ironic manifestation of you, it's January, because this isn't a movie that is simply being plopped out by a major distributor that has no other idea of where to slate a pickup that was unlucky enough to fall out of favor with the changing of studio leadership or whatever. This isn't just an independent production squeaking in to try to get whatever cash there is lying around, as most other distributors just aren't bothering competing in the holiday theater market. This is a movie that has as close as you can get to, like, an actual moral purpose for being, and for being seen not as a commodity, but as a message, a defiant but nonetheless desperate message in a bottle. And quite frankly, it's only reaching US theaters in a limited capacity through the independent advocacy distributor Watermelon Pictures. And while I would never deny this film or its distributor the means to distribute this film in the least compromised way possible, the way least likely to have all its potential material profits siphoned off by some bigger colonizing distributor, I do have to say there's a certain point where I get a tad conspiratorial, and not about any active conspiracy, I want to make that clear. But there's something to be said about the fact that perhaps one of the most pressingly important movies that American audiences could be seeing this year, or any year, is just sort of landing at a limited run of major multiplexes with no advertising campaign, and quite frankly, where would they even advertise? I doubt the legacy media stations, for as much water as they've carried for this genocide for the past 2 years, I doubt they're going to be eager to promote a documentary that is functionally the equivalent of saying directly, hey, this channel that's advertising us, yeah, these are the same people who have been running cover for this atrocity and presenting you a completely blinkered coverage of it that barely touches directly upon the Palestinian experience at all. But aside from maybe TikTok, it's well observed at this point that sites from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter, all major social media platforms basically are engaging in various methods of muting or suppressing content related to Gaza as far as directly representing the experiences of Palestinians and framing their experience accurately as a genocide. Kind of going back to late just this last year when I saw the quite interesting Chinese corporate dramatic comedy To Gather Around, and what I talked about in terms of propaganda and censorship there's an extent to which that living in an ostensibly more free society in terms of speech and political expression, the undergirding authoritarianism of our culture is illustrated most succinctly not by what we do or do not see because of some government controls, but how and if we see things because of an ideological predicate that basically deems a movie as important, as necessary, as downright moral as From Ground Zero, and says, yeah, this is the market equivalent of some janky piece of crap horror flick that even a modern Poverty Row outfit like Vertical Entertainment don't have a lot of confidence in. Even with a movie as crappy as The Damned in that case, there's always a thrill I get of going into a movie on a Thursday night and finding that I have the auditorium all to myself. I do not have the same feeling when I am at a heavily patronized AMC on a Friday night to see a movie about one of the most pressing issues in modern international and especially US politics, and also find that I am literally the only person there. There's a lot of hard to fathom stuff in From Ground Zero, but I'll just fess up. I'm not a cold-hearted person, but I can be pretty hard of heart, and frankly, I even find myself hardening myself intentionally when I'm ready to see something like this film. So no, I didn't cry any crocodile tears during it. The last thing anybody wants to see is the benefactor of this colonization and this genocide. The last thing people want to see is me tearing up like, oh, the sad plight of these poor people. Yeah, it is sad, but I gotta say, like, their art is really good. They made some really powerful short films here. They're suffering some of the worst atrocities ever, and they're running laps around us. It's incredible. But you know when you've had a really powerful film experience much more when you leave the theater, because that's when the renewed glow of light and color and the sights and sounds of the real world hits you in a new way. And the very first thing that I heard when leaving From Ground Zero was just a couple of kids unattended by their parents running around and laughing and stamping about in the halls of the theater. And two things hit me. Not just the naked awfulness of how there were children in Gaza right then and right now that were not able to live and laugh with such freedom and such dignity, but also that I realized in the film I had heard and seen plenty of children laughing and playing and running around and living in spite of that horror. I had seen that this film was not a swan song for the Palestinian people, or especially the new generation of Palestine. It was an anthem for a people who need help, but not saviors, of a people who need relief, but not simply a civil peace that remains murderous, of a people who need dignity and freedom and beauty in their lives, but even in the darkest of hours are perfectly capable of forging that for themselves and are not looking for these things to be beneficently bequeathed to them, but if anything, to be recognized as having that power of being human in that way. And really only needing an end to all the bullshit, an end to the complacency, an end to the hair splitting, to the attrition against their self-evident personhood and nationhood. And yeah, I definitely had to cry for a minute when I got back to the car, that hearing those children laughing and playing around, that was exactly the right thing that I needed to hear coming out of that movie. Are you ever annoyed by unaccompanied minors in movie theaters? Yeah, me too. You should see From Ground Zero not only for its clear moral importance, you should see it because it'll put in perspective. You'll learn to love those unaccompanied minors. You'll learn to hear them and to see them and not be annoyed, but realize how blessed you are to be annoyed by them. Just like anything else, putting a rating to this film feels profane, but for formality's sake, because I also don't want to condescend to the creative accomplishments of these filmmakers, I'm giving From Ground Zero a 4 out of 5. I'm going to toe a line of saying I recognize the extraordinary moral purpose of this film that trumps any sort of conventional rubric of grading it, but I'm also going to just say these are works of art. They are supposed to create emotional resonances and impressions, and I can still recognize the moral purpose of a work of art while saying, yep, some aspects didn't do it for me, some aspects didn't resonate for me, and not because I didn't understand the point, but because I'm respecting these people as artists. I'm respecting them as technicians. I'm respecting them as people with imaginations and visions that are also trying to talk to me like the filmmakers of School Day, through beauty, through aesthetics, through art that in the most defiant way possible, and is also a part of the point of this movie, is supposed to transcend whatever awful, diabolical bullshit my country's government is doing to their country and their people. With that, yeah, I'm signing off. Please, you know what? Don't even bother about sharing this video. Share the movie. Go spread the news about From Ground Zero. Tell your friends. Go see it. Get the word out about this movie. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. And I'm really looking forward to a new year with you guys. Cheers.